I was doing some work for one of the large global credit card companies. So there's three, so pick one. It was one of them. And we were actually working alongside a team from one of the large strategy houses. And we were there helping facilitate the management discussions. It was an executive team and a CEO I'd been working for years. I was very close to. And they were doing a piece of strategy work. And there was a young guy, maybe a year out of business school. And his job was to analyze the regulatory environment in Europe. And he created what I called the world's greatest slide. On one piece of paper, it was color-coded, it was crosshatch, it was circle size, it was circle color. He had for every country in Europe, what is the regulatory environment for that country? He spent about 3.5 weeks building this slide. And he talked to the client people and his office heads and regulators. I mean, he built this unbelievable slide. So the meeting starts, and I guess the senior manager was in charge of the presentation. And this kid was brought in the room while the world's greatest slide went up on the screen. And the world's greatest slide went up on the screen in the regulatory environment in Europe. And the head of Europe, who was a German who lives in Switzerland, said, "Spain is wrong. Next slide." And the guy's nonplussed says, "Excuse me." He said, "Spain is incorrect. Move on." So he turns to the kid who wrote the world's greatest slide, and the kid said, "Well, sir, we worked with the Spain country head from your company. We deal with our Madrid office head as well as the head of our financial services practice in Spain. We talked to a number of regulators. What's wrong?" He says, "Can you not hear me? Spain is wrong. Next slide." So, the manager's not a fool. They moved to the next slide. They moved off of the regulatory environment in Europe. So the kid is in the bar that night at the hotel, was staying in that same hotel, and he was not happy. He has just seen his career flash before his eyes. And he said, "I don't know what happened." I said, "Oh, I do." I sat next to the Europe head at lunch. I said, "Were you supposed to send him all the slides that affected Europe before the meeting?" He said, "Well, actually, we were correcting some errors, and by the time it was done, he was on the plane, so he really didn't get it until last night." I said, "Right. It doesn't matter what was on that slide. Whatever you put was unacceptable." He was not going to have a conversation with his peers about the regulatory environment, about data that he'd never seen. And you'd promised to send it to him, and you didn't, right? So what I am telling through that I think is the thing I learned is conversations start with analysis, but it's only the starting point. And the data and the analysis and the analytical rigor, which we all learn in business school and we all learn working for firms like BCG of the world, are critical. But at a certain level, it's the beginning of the conversation. And what happens after that is really what affects how corporations are run. So what I would say is, yes, analytical rigor is important, but if you promise to send it to the guy and you don't, the world lives, as you and I were both taught, at an emotional, political, rational level. The rational conversation is not going to occur. He violated political and emotional norms, right? There was no way this head of Europe was going to let a conversation happen that day. And so 3.5 weeks of work went out the window because he didn't hit and I said, "Why didn't you send it to the guy?" He says, "Well, there was some issue about circle size and it wasn't quite precise." I said, "Fine, send it and say, look, we know there's some mistakes, but I promised to get it to you. We'll have fixed it by the time you get off the plane, but I wanted you to have this for the plane ride." But there was just no way it was going to happen. So I think, A, never surprise a client, and B, it only starts with the analysis. And what happens after the analysis is what really makes a difference.